Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another new episode of ESL Talk, the first of 2022.
Yes, can't believe we're here already.
I
And
know.
we are your hosts, Faye.
And Daniel.
And last episode on being a polyglot and teaching ESL provided a lot of food for thought on skills and assets for teachers. And today we're shifting our focus to the learner and how we can be better prepared to assist those that may have a learning disability.
Yeah, we'll be talking about what are some of the most common disabilities that teachers may encounter. How can we better prepare ourselves for these? And what can we do in the classroom to make sure all of our learners make the most of their learning opportunities?
And for that, today we will speak to our guest, Naya, an early childhood educator with extensive experience dealing with children with learning disabilities. She also has experience learning English as a second language while overcoming her own struggles with ADHD and dyslexia.
Yeah, real expert. So before we hear from Naya, let's dive into this topic together, Faye, and let's talk about our experiences teaching students who may have learning disabilities. So, Faye, let me ask you what your experiences are or have been working with students with learning disabilities.
Yeah, I'd say I've had two different sets of experience. First, with students that had been diagnosed. And most often, these were students who had dyslexia, which we know it can be often coupled with ADHD. But I've had a few students from Europe mostly who would come in to the exam prep class, actually, where they had to do like reading exams, that timed readings and stuff like that, and or writings. And after one or two classes, they would tell me, actually, this is difficult for me because I have dyslexia and something like that. And it was really helpful for me to know that, so that I could try to help them have different strategies for coping with it, because unfortunately these standardized tests don't take that into account. They're not really given any extra time or anything to make up for that, but then I could try to help them relieve some of that stress. And then I also had a lot of students who I could tell had undiagnosed needs like that.
Right.
Most of these were from Asia, and from what I spoke to some students about and from what I could gather, this is sort of a taboo there and not really spoken about much.
Right.
So it was hard because I'm not gonna say that they have something. I don't know. I'm not an expert, but then at the same time, I could tell that they were struggling with something that was beyond my ability to help them with. Right. How about for you? What kind of experiences have you had?
Yeah, just to kind of connect to what you said about maybe cultural differences in Asia. When I worked in Korea, I taught in kind of a mainstream school. So there were children that I taught who did have some learning disabilities and some that were diagnosed as well. So it was very challenging because if I have a class of 30 or 35 sometimes students, I have such a wide range of needs and wide range of abilities. And it really meant that I had to differentiate a lot. And I wanted to obviously make sure that everyone can access the materials and access the lessons. So it was just a lot more planning on my side, which was fine because I want to make sure that, the student who might be having the most challenge and the student that's going to have the least challenge, that they at least are able to take something from the lesson. So that was a really important experience for me. And then when I was in the UK as well, I was dealing with a lot of behavioral issues. Now, some of that obviously, was down to a lot of different reasons. And again, some of those were diagnosed or disclosed, some were not. And again, that just kind of really helped me in my approach with my communication, with how I dealt with certain students when I was interacting with them and teaching them. So that taught me, again, a lot of really important skills and a lot of really important experiences that I use. And today in the university setting, which I'm kind of most comfortable with, I haven't really seen it to the same extent, or students might even self-identify, or they just say, I want to let you know this. And that does make things a lot easier for me to plan. But I think those are some of the experiences that I've had, which I guess are kind of similar to yours as well.
I guess a lot of teachers can relate to that, right?
I think so.
And I find that the trickiest is when it's the undisclosed or undiagnosed disabilities. How do you help students in those situations?
I think the way that I would approach it is not to go from the angle of it's an issue or it's a problem, because it isn't. It's just a different way of processing information or a different way of learning. So I might approach it from asking the student how they learn best, or what
Mhm.
method of delivery works best for them. So
Sure.
maybe something as simple as, for example, Faye, I noticed that you weren't really paying much attention to the video clip that we watched. So would you prefer just an audio version of that? Would that work better for you? And
Mhm.
that's a really simple tweak that you can do to your lesson that works really well for students. I know in the past, some students have found it difficult to really listen to me during lectures. So what
Mhm.
I've done in the past is recorded the lecture, me speaking, and also a video version, so they can obviously be there in person. They have a video and they also have the audio as well as
Right.
the slides and the material. So it sounds like a lot,
Mhm.
but it's not really.
No,
It's just a
no.
couple of clicks. So that's really helped me to help students. And then another way is just having a discussion of, it seems that you're finding this difficult, and asking why, and being investigative, not
Mhm.
being accusatory or
Right.
negative, just asking the why questions and how we can find a solution. And generally the student might open up a little, or they might disclose something, or they might share something, and then you can use that to kind of meet them in the middle. That's a
Mm.
good way to solve that. But how about for you, Faye? How do you manage students who might struggle, or might access materials differently to others?
Yeah, in terms of materials, find that can be a bit tricky when we don't have that much control over it, right? If it's a class like general English or even like academic preparation where I can control the material, I try to make it more accessible. I've even had students who were colorblind before, so
Mhm.
first couple classes, I like to color code my board a lot, but then they couldn't tell the difference between certain colors. So I'd make sure, okay, which colors can you differentiate from, and I would only use those little
Mhm.
things like that. And just printing with fonts that are easier to read, like Arial or even Times New Roman, that's serif fonts.
Mhm.
But the trickiest thing for me has always been dealing with students who are preparing for an exam, because they won't get those um, let's say adaptations, they won't get those tweaks from the exam.
Mhm.
So I found that for those students, the best thing was to show them exactly what they were going to encounter on the day, so that it doesn't add to their anxiety,
Mhm.
and show them this is exactly what the exam will look like. This is how the text will be printed. This is what you can do with it. You can unstaple the pages. You can put them side by side or whatever. This is what you can and cannot do on the day. Because there's only so much you can control in terms of
Right.
material, right?
It's a really
So
good point.
trying to help in
No
that sense.
surprises, basically, right?
Hmm.
Yeah,
Right.
I found
Yeah.
that works really well with students that I've worked with, by saying, if you're going to be successful in an exam or a test, having no surprises is great, because
Right.
when you're surprised or thrown off, that can really affect the way you work. So yeah, I
Hmm.
think that's a really important point.
Yeah.
So what are some activities or materials that you find work well for students who may have a shorter attention span, or they might have really high energy in your class?
Hmm. So I always try to, like, a simple thing is try to make sure the students are active every 5 to 10 minutes. They are doing something actively, whether it's comparing answers in pairs or standing and changing partners, or, like coming to write
Mhm.
something up on the board. These are
Mhm.
little things that you
Right.
can just be mindful of. Like, how long have my students been sitting down?
Yes.
And how long have they been quiet? Right?
Mhm.
Just like little things. Okay, instead of us all working on this on our own, let's just talk a little bit. And then you can also obviously do things like, instead of doing a reading on their own with the paragraphs in front of them, just posting the paragraphs around the room and having them go around searching for the answers, and just simple things like that, simple ways of making them move, right? And
Yeah,
adapting the material and the activities so that they are not just in their spot
makes a
the
lot of
whole
sense.
time. Yeah,
Right,
I think it's
right.
just a way, just changing our mindset in that sense, right?
Sure.
And what about for young learners then? That comes to mind for me because I don't have a lot of experience with young learners,
Hmm.
but this is even more apparent in that case, right? How have you
Yeah,
helped these students?
very similar to what you said. I try to have that empathy and think, okay, if I was a 7-year-old learning a new language, how would I feel?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so again, break it down like you said. All right, we're not just going to watch something, we're going to act, or we're going to
Mm-hmm.
dance, or we're going to sing. I mean, that's a very basic example. Maybe if we get to a more structured academic mindset, it would be, like you said, working in pairs, working in groups, giving them things that keep their hands busy is really,
Mm,
really useful.
right.
So I used to do a lot of not crafts, but more like cutting shapes or cutting pictures and sticking them in the right places, making posters, presentations, things like that are really useful because busy hands are busy minds. And if
Yeah.
you keep, especially younger ones, you keep their hands moving, then you're going to keep their mind focused on things. But what else I find important is just to keep checking in with the students so you don't lose them, because the attention span is pretty short. So if I'm reading a story, if I'm doing an online class and I'm reading a story with a student, every minute I might just stop them and say, oh, have you ever been in this situation before? Or, they're eating this. Have you ever tried this food? Just to keep them on side, keep their mind ticking over. That's a really good way to do it. And then again, just to try to keep bringing it back and building on what you did previously. That can be a really nice way to help those high energy students by just kind of getting them back on track. Oh, what was the name of that character? What did he look like? And then it keeps their brain moving again. Busy mind keeps the attention.
Yeah, and then it helps them review and retain that information as well.
It's tricky. It takes time, but it can definitely be done. But that's for like younger learners for me in a one-to-one context. But what about for you teaching students with disabilities in a one-to-one context? I mean, have you done this, and how did you approach it to help those students succeed?
Yeah, like again, the most of the one-to-one teaching I've done was either exam prep or for very specific purposes, like for business English, preparing for presentations and things like that. In that case, I find it's a lot easier for the student to be honest or more open with you and disclose this type of information, which once they do, you just have to really embrace it and be like, okay, they trust me. So you can trust them as well. And just be honest with the extent of your knowledge is. And like you said, they usually know what they need. So just especially for those out there that are not that experienced, just ask the student, like, okay, do you have this difficulty or this challenge, or how have you coped with it in the past? How have you coped with this in your own language? Because usually you can transfer those skills. And then just being mindful of those little things that can help them and just kind of taking their lead on that. And if they don't really know how to cope with it, then you might have to do a little bit more research and reach out to more people. But I guess our guest will be able to help us with that as well, right? With some ideas and some simple things that can be helpful for these certain needs that students might have. Right. So let's turn to our guest today, Naya, who will share her experiences on teaching students with learning disabilities. Hi, Naya. Welcome to ESL Talk.
Hi, hello. Thank you guys
Hi,
for
Naya.
having me.
So Naya, as we do with all of our guests, we just like to start off today by asking if you could share with us your teaching story, maybe how you got started and where you are today in your journey.
Yes, of course. My teaching story starts in Brazil, Rio de Janeiro. I had the opportunity to study in one of the best university of Brazil in education. I don't know if you know, but in Brazil, to get into a public university, you need to pass through a test competing with the whole country. And to get into a private university, you can do the same, but you can get a scholarship as well. And those were my two options. I only could study if I get into a public university or a scholarship because my family didn't have money. So that's what I did. And there, I could just see more about my own state, my own country. I could know people from other places, and it was a great experience. It was a time to grow,
And what were you studying?
Pedagogy. In Brazil, we studied pedagogy. I studied education, and then I studied neuroscience. And after that, psychopedagogy. Psychopedagogy, it's from Argentina. I don't know if you guys know about it, but I don't know if you have something like this in North America, but in Latin America, it's really big. Because of my university, I did an internship in a public school. It was a public school linked to the university. It was called CAPI UERJ. It's a school of application. The teachers came from the university, and most of the teachers would have the doctor degree. So it was a huge opportunity too. And I could learn a lot there. My tutors there, they guided me to work in a program called It's Too Good to Play at the School. É muito bom brincar na escola. It's really good to play in the school. And this program used to introduce the kids to old activities, street activities, and it was linked to another program. I started to see that most of the kids in school, when they have a problem, they don't call the adults there. I don't know if they don't trust the adults. I don't know what really happened with this. I don't know if they don't feel open to talk about it, but they start to express this into the playfulness activities, you know? They start to express their feelings. And we could see that with these activities, with these programs.
Did you work more specifically with children with learning disabilities as well?
Yeah, I started to work with this during this program. I could just see the kids, they struggling with their learning disabilities, and no one was able to do something. The teacher were too busy to handle with this disability. So I was there, and I started to make some notes, and I tried to study this, and I started to make the links. Now I'm just studying to get into a master's here in Canada. In Brazil, I could do this 2 post-degree studies in neuroscience and psychopedagogy to get into a master's degree. And now I want to study the trauma.
Naya, would you also mind sharing a little bit about your personal experience with learning disabilities and how that influenced your English studies?
Oh, yeah. I can notice how much the playfulness could help the kids to understand complex concepts and make it easier and funny for them. And I start to remember all the times I created something to try to understand something really hard for me. And I could adapt the content for my comprehension. And this way I could notice that I was always struggling with some parts of my learning process. When the content was introduced in a traditional way, I don't know if you guys express it like this here, but in Brazil, we use a lot of this word. We use a lot this word, traditional. I was always creating my own tools to handle with the hard part. I was always trying to create a memory game, music, trying to record myself. And I always knew that. I need to create something to try to understand. My grades were good. I only noticed that when I was in my post-degree, because I don't know if other people could notice that probably, because bullying was always present in my life. But I didn't know the reason. I know that I'm different. I don't know why. The way I see the things is different, but I don't know how different it is.
Right.
I didn't notice this before. And I could be sure of that when I started my post-degree in neuroscience. And because of my own experience, I could help other children to understand that a disability, I don't like this word, actually. Yeah. It's just a different way to see the same thing. And most of the time, a fun way to do the same thing. A disability can do that for you. You can see the same thing totally different. You can see a game in a totally different way. It's really hard to explain this sometimes.
Oh, I've got it. It's not necessarily about a disadvantage. It's about a different way of doing something.
Yeah, maybe not the traditional way, right? Not the expected way. Yeah,
exactly. It's not the expected way. And then I start to read about other people with disabilities. I really hate this word.
Right, yeah.
With other needs, I prefer to use this, with other needs. And I discovered that most of the brilliant people in the world, used to have something related, a different need.
Yes.
Yeah. And for my English studies, I can say that I love to learn new languages because communication is the key to most of the problems with kids, with adults. If you can communicate, you can resolve a problem. And if you don't understand someone, you can't resolve a problem. It's for me, it's simple. So I really wanted to learn English and French and German and Hebrew, and I really love to know other languages.
So Naya, are there any specific signs or flags that ESL teachers can watch out for that may signal that a learner might have a disability, like dyslexia, for instance?
The first thing with teachers can pay attention is the focus. Are they focused or on the activity, or they used to space out during the class? How did they read? They pause. How can communicate? How they express themselves. I get so nervous when I need to speak, when I need to talk in front of the people, that I need to make my notes. I know everything that I need to say, but if I don't make notes, I get so nervous that I can't even speak. I know everything. I wrote, but if I don't have my notes, I totally space out. I forgot to say, I have ADHD and dyslexia associated with ADHD. Everything I do with the kids and the students, I did with myself first. That was the reason I started to study neuroscience, because I wanted to understand my own brain. I wanted to understand with my own brain why I can't learn like the other people, why I need to do everything like this, why I need to make all these games, why I need to record myself when I read something, why when I read something loud, I can't understand why I'm reading, why I need to record my voice to understand,
Right.
And teachers can pay attention like I used to do. I used to read very well, but I couldn't understand what I was reading. Right. I need to record myself and then listen, and then I could understand what I was reading.
So the comprehension to the audio is better than written form, you'd say?
Yes, for dyslexia. And I could talk with kids most of the time, but other adults, they feel the same. It's really easier when we watch something, when we listen to something, than when we read.
Right.
We can read, but it takes so much time.
It's a lot
we need
harder.
to read. It's really hard. And it doesn't mean that you're not smart.
Of course
just
not,
the way your brain works, the way your synapses make the connections it's different. It's just different. And we need to understand that this. So the signs, they space out. They have the comprehension of what they are reading. They understand everything. They can organize the notebook. You need to pay attention on the notes if they can organize everything, because we have some problems with borders, with the limits of the paper, we used to write everything around and make something like this, signs and
like
circles. Yes, exactly.
So what do you think are some ways that we can make the materials at least more suitable for all of our learners, including these that may have like different learning needs, like you said, right? So are there some tricks or some tips that you have that are easy to follow for teachers?
Yes, of course. Record all the classes. It's a good way. It's really helpful. And for dyslexia, we can use some fonts like Arial, Verdana, Arial, Verdana. Sorry.
No wingdings though.
No wingdings.
No, exactly. Very, very simple. You need to be very, very simple, very, very clear. The paper needs to be very clear. And if it is a face-to-face class, you guys can bring, it's a kind of plastic, I don't remember the name right now. It's the same plastic of the X-ray. It's the same plastic.
Like transparencies?
Yes, transparencies, but it has some colors on it. It's red, green, blue, pink. and you can bring it to the class. It helps a lot. You can put this plastic in front of this. It's a plastic. You can put this plastic on the top of the paper, and you can see which one match for each student. It is really helpful, not for all the dyslexia students. Some of the students with dyslexia can be really helpful.
And what about in terms of activities? Like what kinds of tasks? So you mentioned recordings and things like that can be helpful. What other activities that we could do that could increase their motivation when they're learning English as a second language?
Most of the studies about it, and what I used to do, it's about ludicity, playfulness. You can try to make memory games. You can try to make songs and know the interest. You need to know their hobbies and match the content with this. You can always try to know each student. Yeah, I know it's hard.
But personalizing a little bit.
Personalizing.
It's something that's really essential.
Yes, exactly. You need to know your students and you need to know their hobbies, their interests, and try to match. For example, ADHD students, we have the hyper focus. When you are interested in something, we can talk about it for hours and hours without eating, without drinking, without sleeping, without going to the bathroom. We just stay there and do that for hours and hours and hours without noticing.
Right.
So yes, so we have something like this with something really interesting for us. We totally forget about everything. So for example, if the student like soccer, you can try to make the content about soccer. So they're gonna learn really, really fast. It'll be easier to relate something. And the brain works like this. You learn with connections. If you already have something in your brain connecting this, your brain will be so much faster.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, exactly.
So Naya, is there anything you'd recommend that teachers avoid doing in class, and something that we might change depending on the age group?
Comparing the students. We can't compare. Never. Don't compare the process. Don't compare what they are doing at the moment. Never criticize. Focus on the good things of the process, right? What they can do better. Never compare the students, because every student is totally unique. Every brain is totally unique. It's impossible to do the same thing every time. It's impossible to have the same result, the same result. It's totally impossible to do that. So we need to focus on this person, this process, and about learning different ways always, as I told you before. Recording, games, trying to use different fonts, simple fonts, and you need to focus on it and avoid complicated stuff. Avoid to do a lot of things at the same time, a movie and a test, and it can work for ADHD students, but for other disabilities, it's a nightmare. It's totally a nightmare.
Yeah,
mixing music with writing, with reading at the same times, and games. It's crazy. It's
very maybe overstimulating. Yeah.
Exactly. It's overstimulating. It's a sensorial mess, the people can go home and, oh my gosh, I don't want to see this content again. I don't want to learn about this again.
Yeah.
Which really connects to the next thing I wanted to ask you, because I mean, a lot of our classes seem to be designed that way. A lot of tests are designed that way. So how can we help our students who may be struggling, who may have these different learning needs, stay motivated? Because I can easily see them just going home, like you said, I mean, like, I'm never going back to that class again, or I'm never going to learn English. So how can we help them stay motivated?
We can focus about the person, not as a group, but always about a person. And we can try to talk individually and try to discover what is really bothering this person in particular, and try to adapt some way, try to adapt the content. I know it's really hard when you talk about a group. I know it's really, when I was teaching with a big class, I used to do many activities inside a theater, with 62 children at the same time. So it was a huge mess. It was crazy, but in the end of the day, I was happy because they were happy, and I used to do a lot of activities there, and then I could talk with its kid and discover what they liked much, what it was a huge problem for them, and it's always like this. You can try to do the same activity for them, and then you can need to talk with each student and try to discover what this student need.
So trying to have that one-on-one time with each student.
Yes.
And you'd say that that's the same for adult learners, not only for children.
No, it's the same. Yeah.
That's really interesting. Very insightful. So
exactly.
Would you recommend any additional reading or any source of knowledge for the topic that that you might recommend for teachers that they can read to help them learn more about this?
Yes. I think it's really important to learn about the brain and how the brain works, the synapses works, for example, and then start to read the specific books about learning disabilities. Most of my reading is in Portuguese. Now I start to read in English and other languages like Spanish, but I separate some books here to show you guys. I separate. For example, this is a neuroscientist, one of the best of the world, and she's Brazilian. It's Susana Herculano Rosa, The Human Advantage. This is a really great one. And also Susana Herculano, The Big Question of Neuroscience.
The Big Question of Neuroscience.
The Big Question of Neuroscience. This is some neuroscience introductory, and about disabilities by Jonathan Mooney, Learning Outside the Lines. And another one, Thinking Differently. Think Differently by David Flink. The next one, The Gift of Dyslexia by Ronald D. Davies. And the two other books I really loved, and I really changed my way to see the education. I don't know if you guys heard about it.
Yeah, he's very famous, well known in the education in the education
yes.
world outside of Brazil as well. I've heard several people talk about him here in Canada and even during my master's.
United States as well. Yes.
Yeah.
One of these books is Education of the Heart and Education for Critical Consciousness. Education for Critical Consciousness.
Great.
Both Paulo Freire's.
Nice. That's great. Yeah, lots of good recommendations there.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
And
really
now,
good.
finally, what is one piece of advice you would give teachers who are just starting out teaching English to adults or maybe children, and they might have students with these different learning needs?
Positive education. Positive education is the best start for educators. Before starting to take care of a kid, go to therapy. Go to therapy. Try to understand own feelings first.
Right.
This is really, really important. Why are you mad? Why are you sad? Why are you stressed out? Why the crying bother you so much? Why are you feeling angry all the time? Why do you want to take care of a kid? Why do you want to have a kid? Do you really want to work with kids, and why? I think we need to answer these questions first and try to understand this first. These are really good questions, and I used to ask this to myself all the time.
Yeah.
And I was always trying to answer these questions. And now I know how to answer all these questions. And this made me a better educator.
For sure.
And I'm always trying to prove myself. And then I try to teach them. Yes.
Knowing why and asking yourself why it's a very difficult question. So if we can understand the why and the how of the certain things in the process, I think that makes it a lot easier to try to work with, right?
Exactly.
How can our listeners connect with you if they want to learn more about this topic, or they want to maybe share their own stories working with this, or having their own learning needs?
Yeah, now I'm trying to make more content for internet because I don't have time to do everything, but it's Naya Poch on Instagram. It's at Naya, NayaPotsch.
Great.
Naya Poch on Instagram. And I try to make some content there, and I'm always trying to answer some questions there, and I'm studying. It's a lot to learn. I want to learn how to make a podcast as well, and try to talk with other teachers, and trying to improve my English and try to talk in English.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, we can also link your Instagram to our Instagram post about the podcast. So if our listeners want to find you more easily, just go to our own Instagram and they can find it there. Great.
Nice. Thank you.
Yeah.
Naya, thank you so much for joining us today to discuss a very important topic that we all need to consider as ESL teachers.
And we also want to wish all our listeners a happy new year. This is our first episode of the year, and we will be announcing some huge news for all of us here on ESL Talk in early 2022.
Yes, we will. We have some big things in the pipeline, which hopefully you'll find out about over the next week or so. So stay tuned for that. We're really excited. And as always, if you found the content of the episode useful, we'd love to hear from you. Please do get involved. We've had some wonderful interactions with you guys over the last year. So please keep that up.
Yes, make sure to get in touch with us on Instagram at ESL Talk Podcast, or you can send us an email to esltalkpodcast@gmail.com. And you can also find us individually on Instagram. You can find me at Learning with Faye. Faye is Fey.
Or at I'm Daniel Teacher. I've actually started posting again, so hopefully you guys can join me there.
Yeah. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe for even more ESL teaching content.